Can you activate the network? Jisoo asked. Kyung placed all 4R. The architect network changed everything overnight. Systems that had been legends became reality. Communication that had taken weeks now happened instantly across light years. Trade routes that were dangerous became safe as ancient defense stations came online. Knowledge that had been hoarded was suddenly available to anyone who asked, and it all responded to humanity. Kyung stood at the center of the network's control interface aboard the Perseverance. She could feel thousands of installations across the galaxy, each one waiting for instructions. The power was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "I can coordinate the defense of any world," she said quietly to Taeyang. "I can shut down aggressive fleets. I can redirect resources from rich worlds to poor ones. I can see everything that happens in real time." "Can anyone else control it?" Taeyang asked. "No. I've tried teaching others, both human and alien. The system responds to them slightly, but not like it responds to me, to us, to humanity. It's like the architects keyed it specifically to our neural patterns." Yoonji, a philosopher who had been brought in to help humanity understand their situation, sat nearby listening. She was older, gray-haired, and had spent her life studying ethics and power. Now she had to help her species navigate something no ethics textbook had ever covered. "You understand what this means?" Yoonji said. "Humanity has become the most powerful force in the galaxy, not through military might or economic dominance, but through control of infrastructure itself. Every species now depends on systems that only we can fully operate." Jisoo joined the conversation. "The assembly is fracturing. The Bracknor war chief has called for immediate military action against humanity. The Valorians want to negotiate. The Quorum are trying to find a technological way to take control of the network. And the minor species are looking to us for protection and leadership. We never wanted this," Kyung said. "We just wanted to be treated fairly." "Irrelevant," said Hyun, a military strategist who had been analyzing the galactic situation. "Want or not want doesn't matter. We have power now. The question is what we do with it." That question echoed across Earth and human colonies. Millions of debates raged in homes, government chambers, and public forums. What should humanity do with the architect network? Some argued for using the power to protect humanity's interests, to make sure humans never had to bow to other species again, to build a human-dominated galaxy where Earth's children would be the ones making the rules. Others insisted that humanity should refuse the power entirely, that having such control was too dangerous, too corrupting, that they should shut down the network and return to the way things were. Salmon found herself in the middle of a heated debate in Earth's Central Council. A representative from the Mars colonies was shouting about finally taking what humanity deserved. A delegate from Europa was arguing for complete withdrawal from galactic affairs. "Both of you are missing the point," Soman said, her voice cutting through the argument. "The architects didn't build this network for conquerors or isolationists. They built it for cooperation. If we use it to dominate others, we fail the test. If we refuse to use it at all, we abandon everyone who needs it." "Then what do you suggest?" the Mars representative demanded. "Something new. Something that's never been tried." Daeho had similar conversations on Centralus Prime. Minor species representatives came to him daily, asking for humanity's help. The Chitauri wanted protection from Bracknor retaliation. The Neshra needed humanitarian aid after the Valorians cut off their supply lines. The Gorvan asked for help defending their borders from pirates. Each request was reasonable. Each one could be fulfilled easily using the network. But each request also meant humanity making decisions about other species' lives. It meant power. It meant responsibility. Click 7 visited Deho in his office. The Chitauri representative seemed agitated, its compound eyes reflecting anxious colors. "The Bracknor have blockaded our homeworld," Click 7 said. "They claim we violated assembly law by helping humanity. Our people are starving. You have the power to stop this with a thought. Will you help us?" Daeho felt the weight of that question. He could give the order. Kyung could use the network to disable the Bracknor fleet, to force them to withdraw. It would be easy, but it would also mean humanity using military force against another species. It would mean becoming what they had fought against. "Yes," Daeho said finally, "but not the way you think." He sent a message through the network to the Bracknor fleet commander. The message was simple. "The blockade violates the architect's principles of free movement and mutual support. Withdraw or face consequences." The Bracknor commander sent a reply full of insults and threats. Daeho responded by using the network to broadcast the entire situation to every species in the galaxy. The Bracknor blockading a civilian population. The Chitauri starving because they dared to seek equality. Public pressure mounted across the galaxy. Other species condemned the blockade. Even some Bracknor military officials expressed discomfort with starving civilians. The fleet withdrew without humanity firing a single shot, but not every situation was so easily resolved. The Valorians didn't use military force. They used something more subtle. They began spreading propaganda through their extensive cultural networks. They called humanity power-hungry. They claimed humans were using the network to spy on other species. They suggested that the architects would have been horrified by what humanity was doing. The propaganda was effective because it contained a grain of truth. Humanity did have unprecedented power. They could spy on any world if they chose, and nobody knew what the architects would really think, because they were long gone. Public opinion began to turn against humanity on many worlds. Protests erupted. Some species that had supported humanity started to have doubts. Hana watched the propaganda spread and felt sick. "They're using our greatest fear against us," she told Daeho. "The fear that we might become tyrants. That power might corrupt us." "Maybe they're right to fear that," Daeho said. "Maybe we should fear it too." Meanwhile, the Quorum worked on a different approach. They couldn't match humanity's control of the network, but they could try to influence human controllers. Kyung felt the first telepathic probe while she was sleeping. Gentle, almost unnoticeable. The Quorum were trying to plant suggestions in her mind, trying to subtly alter her decisions. She reported it to Taiyang, who developed mental shielding techniques. But the attempts continued, growing more sophisticated. The Quorum were patient. They were willing to work on this for years if necessary. A crisis point came when a conflict erupted between two minor species over a resource-rich asteroid field. Both sides asked humanity to intervene using the network. Both sides believed they were in the right. Both sides threatened war if humanity didn't support them. Daeho, Jisoo, Kyung, Yoonji, and other human leaders met to discuss the situation. The room was tense. Whatever they decided would set a precedent. "We can't take sides," Yoonji argued. "The moment we become judges in other species' disputes, we become rulers. That's not what the architects wanted." "But if we do nothing, people die," Jisoo countered. "The network gives us the power to stop wars. Don't we have a responsibility to use it?" "Responsibility to whom?" Yoonji asked. "To the people dying today? Or to the billions who might die in future wars if we establish precedent that humanity arbitrates all conflicts?" The debate raged for hours. Finally, someone proposed a solution. "What if we don't decide? What if we use the network to bring both sides together, to facilitate their communication, but let them reach their own resolution?" It seemed too simple, too passive, but they tried it. Kyung used the network to create a shared communication space where both species could talk directly, with real-time translation and cultural context provided by the architect's systems. The two species negotiated for 3 days. It was messy and emotional and almost broke down several times, but they reached an agreement, without humanity making the decision for them. "This could work," Daeho said, watching the results. "Not humanity ruling, but humanity facilitating, using the network to enable cooperation rather than enforce it." But the great powers weren't ready to accept this new order. The Bracknor assembled a fleet larger than anything seen in centuries. Thousands of warships. Enough firepower to devastate human space. The war chief sent a message to Earth. "You will surrender control of the network or we will take it by force. You have 1 week." Jisoo looked at the tactical displays and calculated the odds. Even with the network's defensive capabilities, even with support from minor species, humanity couldn't survive that kind of assault. The Bracknor were willing to accept massive casualties to reclaim their position of power. "We could stop them," Kyung said quietly. "The network has weapons we haven't activated yet. Ancient systems that could disable their fleet. We could win this war. At what cost?" Yoonji asked. "How many Bracknor would die? Thousands, millions? And what would we become in the process?" "Dead if we don't fight," Hyun said bluntly. "You can't negotiate with someone who's pointing a gun at your head." The week passed in a blur of frantic diplomacy. Someone tried to build a coalition in the assembly to condemn the Bracknor aggression, but the great powers blocked every attempt. The minor species offered to send their The Perseverance cut through dark space at maximum speed. Behind them, Bracknor warships gave chase. Commander Jisoo watched the tactical display and calculated their odds of survival. They weren't good. "Can we jump to faster than light?" she asked her navigator. "Not until we clear the gravity well. Another 20 minutes. We don't have 20 minutes. Those Bracknor ships will be in weapons range in 10. In the ship's science bay, Taeyang examined the artifact while Hana looked over his shoulder. Taeyang was humanity's best xenotechnology expert, but even he seemed baffled by what he was seeing. "This isn't technology in any sense we understand," he said. "It's not mechanical. It's not electronic. It's almost biological, but not quite. It's like it's alive." "Can it help us?" Hana asked. "Help us do what?" "I don't know, anything. The symbols respond to me, to humans. Maybe it can respond to our situation." Taeyang looked skeptical, but they were running out of options. "Try it." Hana placed both hands on the artifact and closed her eyes. She had spent 3 days in those ruins before the Bracknor came. 3 days studying the symbols, trying to understand their patterns. In that time, she had felt something like a connection forming. Like the artifact was learning from her as much as she was learning from it. Now she focused on that feeling and tried to push a thought into the artifact. "Help us," the artifact pulsed brighter. The symbols began to move faster, spinning and reforming in patterns that hurt to watch. Then something happened that made Taeyang stumble backward. Images flooded Hana's mind. Not words or symbols, but pure information. She saw the architects as they had been millions of years ago. Beings of light and energy and something else, something that had no name in human language. They had held the galaxy together not through force but through wisdom. Through connection, they had built a network that spanned thousands of worlds, a way for species to communicate instantly across the void of space. To share knowledge, resources, ideas. They had created a golden age that lasted for eons, but they had also built in safeguards. They knew that power corrupted. They knew that eventually, species would try to use their technology to dominate rather than cooperate. So they locked away the most important pieces and made them respond only to species that showed certain qualities. Adaptability, empathy, the ability to hold contradictory ideas and find synthesis, the capacity for change. The architects had tested hundreds of species across millions of years. None had passed until now. Hana opened her eyes. "They chose us," she whispered. "The architects chose humanity." "What do you mean?" Taeyang asked. "The artifact isn't just technology. It's a test, and we passed. The architects were looking for a species that could carry on their work, build the kind of galaxy they dreamed of. They'd been waiting for millions of years, and they chose us." "Warning," the ship's computer announced. "Bracknor vessels entering weapons range." Jisoo's voice came over the intercom. "Whatever you're doing down there, do it faster." Hana looked at the artifact. "Can you help us reach safety?" The artifact pulsed once, then it projected a holographic map, showing a route through an asteroid field that the ship's computers hadn't detected, a path that would take them out of the gravity well faster. Hana grabbed the intercom. "Commander, I'm sending you new navigation data. Follow it exactly." "From where?" "From the artifact." "Trust me." Jisoo hesitated for only a second. Then she forwarded the data to her navigator. "Do it." The Perseverance veered into the asteroid field. The Bracknor ships followed, confident in their superior shields and weapons. But the path the artifact showed was precise. Every turn, every acceleration, perfectly timed. The human ship threaded through gaps that shouldn't have been possible to navigate. The Bracknor weren't so lucky. 2 of their ships clipped asteroids and had to fall back for repairs. The third tried to follow but couldn't match the human ship's course. The Perseverance cleared the gravity well and jumped to faster-than-light speed. They were safe for now. In the science bay, Taeyang stared at the artifact with new respect and new fear. If this is real, if the architects really chose humanity, then we're in more danger than I thought. "Why?" Hana asked. "Because the other species didn't pass the test. Think about it. The Valorians, the Quorum, the Bracknor, they've been searching for architect technology for thousands of years. They've built their entire civilizations on scraps they found. But the really important stuff, the network, the core systems, they could never access it, because the architects locked them out." "Exactly. They know more about the architects than they've ever told anyone. And they know that whoever controls the architect network controls the galaxy. That's why they're so desperate to stop us." Back on Centralis Prime, Deho was discovering just how desperate. The assembly had convened again, this time in closed session. When he tried to attend, Bracknor guards blocked his way. "Human presence is not required," one of them said. Daeho's communicator buzzed. It was Minho, his security chief, a former soldier who had learned to navigate the dangerous waters of galactic politics. "Get out of the building," Minho said urgently. "I just intercepted chatter from the Quorum district. They're planning something." Daeho didn't ask questions. He turned and walked quickly toward the exit. Behind him, he heard the guards speaking into their communicators. He made it to the human district just as the announcement came through. The assembly had voted. Humanity was now considered a galactic security risk. All human ships were to be quarantined. All human colonies were to be isolated. Any human found in possession of architect artifacts would be arrested immediately. Jisoo watched the announcement from the Perseverance and felt cold rage building in her chest. "They're treating us like criminals. We found something they've been looking for, and now we're the bad guys." "It's not about right or wrong," Taeyang said. "It's about power. They're afraid." "Good," Jisoo said. "Maybe it's time they learned what fear feels like." But fear was spreading in other directions too. Within days, something unexpected started happening. Minor species across the galaxy began reaching out to humanity through secret channels. The Chitauri, an insectoid race that had been exploited for their labor for centuries. The Neshra, aquatic beings whose worlds were controlled by Valorian overseers. The Gorvan, silicon-based life forms that were denied representation in the assembly. They had all heard about humanity's discovery. They had all watched the assembly's reaction. And they all saw the same thing, a chance for change. A Chitauri named Click7 sent a message that Daeho read 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. "For 200 years, we watched humans accept their low status. We thought you were weak. We thought you had no pride. Now we understand. You were waiting, learning, preparing. The great powers fear you because you remind them that they are not eternal, that their dominance is not natural law. If you fight them, we will stand with you, not because we believe you will win, but because it is time someone tried." Daeho sat in his office and felt the weight of that message. Humanity had never asked to be revolutionaries. They had just wanted a fair chance, a voice in the galactic community, respect. Now dozens of species were looking to them for leadership, looking to them to challenge an order that had been in place for thousands of years. On the Perseverance, Hana continued working with the artifact. She had learned to enter a meditative state where the symbols made sense, where she could understand the pure information they carried, and what she learned terrified her. The artifact wasn't alone. There were others scattered across the galaxy. The Valorians had one, kept secret in their most sacred temple. The Quorum had recovered another from a dead world centuries ago. The Bracknor military had a third locked in their deepest vault. Each artifact was a key. Individually, they were powerful. Together, they could activate the architect network. The great systems that connected the galaxy. The technology that could bring unprecedented prosperity and peace. But the network had rejected every species that tried to claim it. It would not work for conquerors. It would not serve tyrants. It required cooperation, consensus, shared purpose. The ancient races had failed that test, and they knew it. So they had hidden the artifacts and forbidden anyone else from searching for them, until humanity came along and found one anyway. Hana looked at Taeyang. "We can't let them keep the network locked away. That's not what the architects wanted. They built it for everyone. Getting the other artifacts will be impossible," Taeyang said. "They're guarded by the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Then we'll have to do the impossible," Hana said. "Because if we don't, nothing will ever change. Humanity will always be on the bottom, and so will every other species that doesn't have the power to fight back." Word reached Daeho about what Hana had learned. He called an emergency meeting of every human leader he could reach. Jisoo joined by holoprojection. So did representatives from Earth's colonies and outposts. They talked through the night. Some argued for surrender, for giving up the artifact and hoping the assembly would show mercy. Others wanted to fight but couldn't see how they could possibly win. Finally, an old diplomat named Soman spoke up. She had been arguing for peace all night, but now her voice was hard. "We're asking the wrong question. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about what kind of species we want to be." The Valorian homeworld was the most beautiful place Bora had ever seen. Crystal spires reached toward the sky, refracting sunlight into cascades of color. Gardens of living minerals grew in geometric patterns that seemed almost mathematical in their perfection. Everything was ordered, clean, precise. It made Bora's job as an infiltrator incredibly difficult. She wore a hollow field generator that made her look like a Valorian servant, one of the lower castes that maintained the crystal gardens. She had studied their movements for weeks through stolen surveillance footage, the way they walked with heads bowed, the way they never made eye contact with their superiors, the way they moved through the world trying to be invisible. Bora was good at being invisible. The artifact was kept in the Garden of First Light, the holiest site in Valorian culture. It sat on a pedestal at the center of a crystal maze, guarded by honor sentinels who had trained their entire lives for this duty. Taking it by force was impossible, but taking it through deception might just work. The plan relied on timing. While Bora was on the Valorian homeworld, Minho was leading a team onto the Quorum home station, and Junho was flying a squadron toward the Bracknor military fortress. All three operations had to succeed. If even one failed, the others would be for nothing. Bora entered the Garden of First Light during the morning ceremony when thousands of Valorians came to meditate. She moved with the crowd, her head bowed, her movements perfectly matching the servant caste's demeanor. The holofield was good, but it wouldn't hold up to close scrutiny. She needed to reach the artifact before anyone looked too carefully. Meanwhile, across the galaxy on Centralis Prime, Deho stood before the assembly and began speaking. His words were being broadcast live to every member world. Billions of beings were watching. For 200 years, Deho said, humanity has listened. We've heard the great powers speak about galactic law, about order, about the importance of tradition. We've heard speeches about the wisdom of the ancient races and the need for younger species to learn their place. He paused and looked directly at the Valorian ambassador. We've listened, and now we have questions. The Valorian ambassador's crystal form darkened with irritation. This is not the time for, why did the architects leave? Daiho asked, his voice cutting through the chamber. Why did the greatest civilization in galactic history abandon everything they built? We're told they simply vanished. But that's not what the ruins say. That's not what the artifacts show. Murmurs spread through the assembly. Representatives from minor species leaned forward. This was dangerous ground Daiho was walking. Discussing the architects openly was forbidden. The architects didn't vanish, Daiho continued. They left because they were disappointed. They built a network for cooperation, for shared prosperity. They created technology that could unite the galaxy, and the species that came after them used it for domination instead. On the Quorum home station, Minho and his team moved through corridors filled with telepathic energy. The Quorum could read minds, sense emotions, detect thoughts. Normally, infiltrating their territory was impossible, but Minho had trained his team in a technique that humanity had developed specifically for this mission. Complete mental silence. No thoughts about the mission. No emotions about success or failure. They had spent months learning to make their minds like still water, reflecting nothing. The Quorum artifact was kept in a meditation chamber deep inside the station. The telepathic species used it to enhance their mental abilities, though they didn't fully understand its purpose. They thought it was a tool. They didn't know it was a test they had failed. Minho's team reached the chamber and found it unguarded. Why would the Quorum need guards when they could read the intentions of anyone who approached? But they couldn't read minds that were perfectly blank. At the Bracknor military fortress, Junho led his squadron through weapons fire that lit up space like fireworks. The Bracknor had detected them immediately, of course. The fortress was designed to track and destroy any threat, which was exactly what Jisoo was counting on. The Perseverance and her entire fleet engaged the fortress head-on in what appeared to be a suicide run. Bracknor commanders watched their sensors and prepared to destroy the human forces. They never noticed the small squadron of fighters slipping through an asteroid field on the opposite side of the fortress. Junho flew at speeds that made his co-pilot nauseous. Human reflexes were faster than most species. Human tolerance for risk was higher. Junho pushed both advantages to their absolute limit. This is insane, his wingman said over the comm. That's why it'll work, Junho replied, threading between two asteroids with centimeters to spare. Back on the Valorian homeworld, Bora reached the crystal maze. She had one shot at this. She pulled out a device that Taeyang had built, a replica of the Valorian artifact based on scans from surveillance footage. It wouldn't fool anyone who examined it closely, but from a distance in the refracted light of the garden, it might pass. She waited for the morning ceremony to reach its peak, when all the Valorians were deep in meditation. Then she moved quickly through the maze. She had memorized the path, practiced it 1,000 times in virtual reality, left at the blue crystal, right at the golden pillar, straight through the hall of reflection. The artifact sat on its pedestal, pulsing with soft light. It was smaller than the one Hana had found, but clearly from the same source. The symbols on its surface were different, though. Unique. Bora switched it with the replica in one smooth motion and turned to leave. She made it 3 steps before a voice spoke behind her. "You do not belong here." A Valorian honor sentinel stood blocking her path. Its crystalline form seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. A warrior, not a priest. Bora's holofield failed. The sentinel saw her true form, a human woman in tactical gear, holding one of their most sacred treasures. "I apologize," Bora said calmly, "but I'm going to have to keep this." She triggered a pulse device that Taeyang had designed based on architect technology. It emitted a frequency that interfered with Valorian neural structures. The sentinel staggered, disoriented. Bora ran. Behind her, alarms began to sound. The entire garden came alive with security forces. But Bora had planned her escape route as carefully as her entrance. She had a small craft hidden in a nearby maintenance area, and she reached it just as Valorian security closed in. The craft launched into the sky with weapons fire chasing it. Bora pushed the engines to maximum and aimed for the orbital rendezvous point. "Package secured," she reported over the comm. "But they know I was here." On the quorum station, Minho's team extracted the artifact from its chamber and began their exit. They maintained perfect mental silence, but the quorum had other sensors. When the artifact was moved, automated alarms activated. The team ran through corridors as quorum security forces mobilized. Minho felt the pressure of telepathic attacks trying to break through his mental defenses. Waves of fear, confusion, pain. The quorum could weaponize emotion. But humans had developed mental discipline specifically to counter this. Minho focused on the training, on the breathing techniques, on keeping his mind empty of everything except movement. They reached their extraction point just as quorum warships began locking weapons on their shuttle. Now would be a good time to leave, Minho said to his pilot. The shuttle jumped to faster-than-light speed half a second before quorum energy weapons fired. They were clear. At the Bracknor fortress, Junho and his squadron reached the vault where the 3rd artifact was kept. The Bracknor didn't keep their artifact in a temple or meditation chamber. They kept it in a military installation, surrounded by weapons and guards. Junho landed his fighter in the fortress's landing bay and jumped out with a small team. They fought through security forces with precision and desperation. Every Bracknor soldier was bigger and stronger than any human, but humans were faster and more adaptable. They blasted their way into the vault and found the artifact sitting in a containment field. Junho grabbed it and immediately felt a surge of energy run through his body. The artifact recognized him as human. It responded, "We got it," he shouted. "Everyone out!" The team ran back to their fighters with the entire fortress mobilizing against them. Junho's fighter took 3 hits as he launched, but he kept it flying through sheer determination. Outside the fortress, Jisoo watched her fleet taking heavy losses. 5 ships destroyed, 10 more badly damaged, but they had bought enough time for Junho's squadron to complete their mission. "All ships fall back," she ordered. "Retreat to the rendezvous point." The fleet scattered, using every trick they knew to evade pursuit. The Bracknor warships gave chase, but they were built for power, not speed. The human and allied ships were smaller, more maneuverable, and motivated by something the Bracknor couldn't match: desperation and hope combined. At the rendezvous point in deep space, the 3 teams arrived within minutes of each other. Bora's craft limped in with engines failing. Minho's shuttle arrived with its shields almost depleted. Junho's squadron was down to half its original number, but they had all 3 artifacts. Kyung waited aboard the Perseverance with the 4th artifact already in her hands. When the other 3 were brought to her, she felt them resonate. Like pieces of a puzzle recognizing each other. Like instruments in an orchestra tuning to the same note. Do we bend the knee and accept permanent servitude, or do we Sirth had never been so divided? In the streets of Seoul, Tokyo, New York, and Lagos, protests broke out. Half the population demanded that humanity surrender the artifact and end the crisis peacefully. The other half called for resistance, for standing up to the ancient powers no matter the cost. Salmon found herself leading the peace faction despite her words at the meeting. She believed humanity should fight, but she also believed they should survive, and surrendering might be the only way to ensure that. She stood before the Earth Council and made her case. We have 12 colony worlds and maybe 50 ships that could be called military vessels. The Braknor alone have thousands of warships. The Valorians can project energy weapons that melt planets. The Corium can coordinate fleets through telepathy in ways we can't counter. If we fight, we die. All of us. Daeho stood on the other side of the chamber. And if we surrender, we die slowly. Our spirit dies. Our dignity dies. We become exactly what they think we are. Lesser beings who exist to serve their interests. I'd rather die fighting than live on my knees. The council was split evenly. They voted 3 times and couldn't reach a decision. Meanwhile, the assembly's deadline was approaching. In 72 hours, they would send an armada to Earth to take the artifact by force. On the Perseverance, Jisoo was making preparations for a fight she knew she couldn't win. Her crew of 200 was ready to give their lives protecting humanity's future. But what good would 200 deaths do against thousands of enemy ships? Then something unexpected happened. A small vessel appeared near the Perseverance without warning. It was Chitauri design, covered in biological plating that looked like an insect shell. Jisoo raised shields and prepared weapons, but the ship made no aggressive moves. Instead, it sent a message. We are here to help. Within 6 hours, a dozen more ships arrived. Neshra vessels that moved through space like water. Gorvan ships that looked like flying mountains of crystal and stone. All of them small, all of them lightly armed, but all of them willing to stand with humanity. Click 7, the Chitauri Eye who had sent the first message, docked with the Perseverance and came aboard. It stood nearly 3 meters tall with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected rainbow colors. When it spoke, its words were translated by a device on its thorax. We are not warriors, Click 7 said to Jisoo. Our people have never fought in a war, but we are tired of being slaves in all but name. If humans can challenge the old powers, then we can too. A Neshra named Wavesong joined them, floating in a tank of liquid that allowed her to communicate. My people have sent 20 ships. It's all we have. But we remember when the Valorians came to our world and demanded tribute. We remember when we asked the assembly for protection and were ignored. We will not forget this chance to resist. More species sent representatives. More ships arrived. They weren't a fleet, not really. Just dozens of desperate species who saw humanity's defiance as their own. But they brought something more valuable than ships. They brought information. A Gorvan engineer named Hardstone had worked on Valorian installations for years. He knew where their artifact was kept. A Neshra diplomat had attended quorum ceremonies and seen their artifact displayed. Even the Braknor military had leaks. A low-ranking soldier fed information to the resistance about security protocols. Jisoo looked at the intelligence reports and started to see a plan forming. It was insane. It would require perfect timing, incredible luck, and skills humanity didn't even know if they possessed. But it was possible. Maybe, she called Daeho. I can get the artifacts, but I'll need help from inside the assembly. Someone needs to keep them distracted. Daeho smiled grimly. I think I can manage that. On Earth, a young engineer named Kyung was brought into the secret project. She was barely 25, fresh from the academy, but she had a gift that nobody could explain. When she touched the artifact Hana had found, she didn't need meditation or practice. The symbols just made sense to her. Taeyang ran tests and confirmed what they suspected. Kyung could interface with architect technology naturally. In minutes, she understood systems that took Hana days to comprehend. How are you doing this? Taeyang asked. Kyung shrugged. I don't know. It's like the artifact is speaking a language I already know, like remembering something instead of learning it. Can you activate the network if we get the other artifacts? I think so. But I'll need all 4 of them. The one we have plus the 3 the ancient races are hiding. Then we better get them, Kyung said. She looked too young to be part of something this dangerous. But her eyes were steady. When do we start? The plan came together over the next week. It had 3 parts, all happening simultaneously. Jisoo would lead the military operation to steal the artifacts. Daeho would create chaos in the assembly to divide their attention, and Kyung would stand ready to activate the network the moment they had all 4 pieces. It was a plan that required everything to go right. In warfare, nothing ever went completely right. But they were out of options and out of time. The day before the operation, Soman came to see Daeho. Her face was tired, aged by the weight of responsibility. "I still think this is suicide," she said. "But I understand why you're doing it. And if you're going to die, you shouldn't die alone." "What do you mean?" "I've been in contact with old colleagues. Diplomats from a dozen species who are sick of how the assembly operates. They can't help you militarily, but they can help you legally. If you're going to steal these artifacts, you need to frame it properly. Not as theft, but as recovery of shared heritage. Not as rebellion, but as enforcement of the architect's true intent." Daeho felt something like hope stirring. "You think you can make that argument?" "I think I can try. And I think there are more people in the assembly who are unhappy than the great powers realize." The vote to quarantine humanity was close. Some delegates abstained. Some voted yes but looked ashamed. The cracks are there. We just need to widen them. The night before the operation, Hana sat with the artifact one final time. She entered the meditative state and reached out to the consciousness within. "Why us?" she asked. "Why did you choose humanity?" The answer came not in words but in feelings and images. She saw humanity's history through the architect's perspective, saw a species that had come from a single world and spread across the stars, a species that fought terrible wars but always chose to rebuild afterward, a species that could hold art and science, emotion and logic, tradition and progress all at once. The architects showed her other species they had tested, the Valorians who had grown too rigid, too focused on perfection and purity, the Quorum who had become obsessed with control and manipulation, the Brackner who saw everything as a hierarchy to climb. Humanity was messy, contradictory, sometimes violent, sometimes compassionate, always changing. And that was exactly what the architects needed. A species that could adapt, that could make mistakes and learn from them, that could bring together different viewpoints and find compromise. But the architects also showed her a warning. Power could corrupt even the best species. If humanity claimed the network, if they became the new masters of the galaxy, they could become what they fought against. The cycle would continue. The only way to break the cycle was to refuse to perpetuate it, to build something new, something better. Hana opened her eyes with tears on her face. She understood now what the architects truly wanted. Not a new empire, not a new dynasty, something the galaxy had never seen. She found Daeho and told him everything. He listened in silence and then nodded slowly. "So we can't just take power. We have to share it. Transform it. Make something that serves everyone instead of a few." The architects built the network for cooperation, not domination. If we use it to rule over others, we fail the test. We become the same as the species we're fighting. "That's going to be a hard sell," Daeho said. "People are scared. When you're scared, you want someone strong to protect you, someone in charge. Then we'll have to teach them that strength doesn't mean domination, that being in charge doesn't mean controlling others." The architects believed it was possible. That's why they left the network behind. Daeho thought about all the species that had reached out to humanity, all the desperate voices asking for leadership, for someone to stand up to the ancient powers. They weren't looking for new masters. They were looking for partners. Maybe humanity could give them that. The next morning, Jisoo prepared her fleet for departure. She had 40 ships now, a mix of human vessels and volunteers from minor species. Against the assembled might of the great powers, it was nothing. But it was enough to try. She addressed her crew one last time. "We're about to do something that every tactical manual says is impossible. We're going to hit 3 separate targets simultaneously, each one heavily defended, and steal artifacts that are the most closely guarded treasures in the galaxy. If we succeed, we'll change history. If we fail, we'll be remembered as fools or forgotten entirely." She paused and looked at the faces staring back at her. Human, Chitauri, Neshra, Gorvan, and others. Different species united by a common cause, but here's what I know. For the first time in my career, I'm not fighting alone. For the first time, humanity isn't alone. We have allies. We have friends. We have people who believe in us. So we King Belmbury. Daeho sat in the back row of the assembly chamber and tried not to fall asleep. He had been a human diplomat for 7 years now, and every session felt exactly the same. The great powers would speak for hours about their concerns, their trade disputes, their territorial claims. When it came time for humanity to speak, the chamber would empty. The important delegates would leave. The ones who remained would check their data pads or whisper among themselves. Today was no different. Deho stood when his turn came and requested better protection for human cargo ships. Pirates had attacked 3 vessels in the last month. 2 crews were dead. The Valorian delegate, a being made of living crystal that refracted light in patterns that hurt to look at, barely glanced his way. "Your request is noted," she said in a voice like chimes. Then she moved on to the next speaker. Noted, always noted. Never acted upon. Deho returned to his seat and gathered his things. Earth had sent him here to make humanity matter, to give their species a voice in galactic affairs. After 200 years of membership in the Assembly, humans were still treated like children at an adult's table. Useful for labor, good for manning the mining operations on toxic worlds where other species refused to work, but not worth listening to. He left the chamber and walked through the massive corridors of Centralis Prime. The neutral world sat at the center of explored space, built by the architects millions of years ago according to legend. Every species had a district here. The Valorian sector glowed with crystalline towers. The Quorum district hummed with telepathic energy that made Deho's head ache. The Breknor military compound bristled with weapons and soldiers. The human district was small. 3 buildings and a landing pad. Deho's communicator buzzed. He pulled it out and saw a message from Hana, a xenoarchaeologist he had met at a cultural exchange 5 years ago. They had stayed in touch, mostly complaining to each other about how the galaxy treated humanity. "Need to talk," the message read. "Found something big. Really big," he called her back. Hana's face appeared on the screen and Deho immediately knew something was wrong. Her eyes were wide and she kept glancing over her shoulder. "What happened?" he asked. "I can't talk about it over an open channel," she said. "But I need you to get me an emergency transport back to Centralis. I'm on Kepler 9, that dead world on the edge of the outer rim. I found ruins. Architect ruins, and something else." Deho felt his pulse quicken. The architects were a myth, or so most species claimed. The precursor race that supposedly built the great stations and seeded the galaxy with technology. No one had ever found conclusive proof they existed. "What kind of something else?" he asked. Hana held up a small crystalline object. It pulsed with soft blue light. "This was in the central chamber. When I touched it, it activated. Deho, it has symbols on it and they're moving, changing, and I think they're responding to me." Before Deho could respond, the connection cut out. He tried calling back 3 times. No answer. He ran to the human administrative building and burst into Commander Jisu's office. She looked up from her desk, annoyed at the interruption until she saw his face. "We have a problem," Deho said. 20 minutes later, Jisu was on a secure channel with the human defense vessel Perseverance, currently on patrol near the outer rim. "I need you to divert to Kepler 9 immediately," she told her second-in-command. "Pick up Dr. Hana and anything she's carrying. Highest priority." "What's the situation?" the officer asked. "Potentially hostile. She found something the big powers might want." That was an understatement. If the Assembly discovered that a human had found working architect technology, they would take it by force. Humanity had no power to stop them. The Perseverance reached Kepler 9 4 hours later. By then, 3 Breknor warships were already in orbit. Jisu watched the tactical display from Centralis Prime and felt her stomach drop. "They're jamming all communications from the surface," her communications officer reported, "and they're deploying ground troops." "Get our people out of there," Jisu ordered. The Perseverance dove into the atmosphere with shields blazing. Breknor fighters scrambled to intercept, but the human ship was fast and its pilot was desperate. They landed near Hana's research camp to find it burning. Breknor soldiers in powered armor were searching through the wreckage. Hana was hiding in a cave system 3 kilometers away, still clutching the artifact. The Perseverance's sensors found her heat signature, and the crew extracted her just as Breknor ground forces closed in. The ship launched with weapons fire, chasing it into the sky. "We have her," the captain reported, "and whatever she found. But we just made some very powerful enemies." When Hana arrived on Centralis Prime, she was exhausted and terrified. Deho met her at the landing pad. She handed him the artifact without a word. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. "What is it?" he asked. I don't know exactly, Hana said, but I spent 3 days studying those ruins. The architects were real, Deho. They built things that make our technology look like stone tools. And this is some kind of key. Or maybe a test. The symbols change based on who's holding it. They didn't respond to my research assistant. He's Neshra, aquatic species. But they respond to me. To humans. Why would ancient technology respond to humans specifically? That's what I'm trying to figure out. But the Bracknor knew I found something. They came too fast. Someone must have been monitoring my research. That night, Deho couldn't sleep. He sat in his quarters holding the artifact and watching the symbols flow across its surface. They formed patterns that seemed almost familiar, like a language he had forgotten. The next morning, the assembly convened an emergency session. Deho attended and knew immediately that something had changed. The chamber was full. Every major delegate was present. They weren't looking at their data pads or whispering. They were staring at him. The Valorian ambassador spoke first. We understand that humanity has recovered an object of historical significance from Kepler 9. This object is galactic heritage and must be surrendered to the assembly. Immediately, the quorum representatives' mental voice echoed through the chamber. All research on the object must be turned over. Any copies of data must be destroyed. The Bracknor war chief stood, his massive form casting shadows across the floor. This is not a request. This is galactic law. You have 1 standard day to comply. Deho stood slowly. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. Since when does the Assembly care about galactic heritage? We've been asking for access to architect sites for decades. Every request was denied. Now we find something on our own, and suddenly it's everyone's concern. That artifact is dangerous, the Valorian ambassador said. You do not understand what you have found. Then explain it to us, Deho said. We're all part of this assembly, aren't we? We're supposed to work together. The chamber fell silent. Finally, the quorum representative spoke again. Some knowledge is not meant for younger species. Surrender the artifact. Deho looked around the chamber. He saw fear in their alien faces. Fear in something else? Desperation? No, he said quietly. I don't think we will. The Valorian ambassador's crystal body flared bright with anger. Then humanity has chosen its path. The assembly will act accordingly. As Deho left the chamber, he realized that everything had changed. For 200 years, humanity had tried to fit in, to be accepted, to earn respect through compliance, and all it had earned them was contempt. But now they had something the great powers wanted, something they feared. For the first time since joining the galactic community, humanity mattered. The question was whether they would survive mattering.